How's it going, Juan?
Doing all right. What's up, man?
Good. It's good to meet you.
Good to meet you. I was looking at your page and you do some pretty impressive work.
Thank you. Yeah.
What what got you into this sort of thing? Because this is what's the? Do you guys price this out by like square footage or what?
Oh, we're talking about my design work now, the roundhouse designs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what got me into that. Geez. Well, the housing crash of 2008 specifically got me into it because I was working for a small custom residential architect, and that firm went under, and so I was back to driving around in a pickup truck with tools in the back and finding the odd remodel and stuff just to make ends meet. And my wife and I, we got a piece of land out in this little town called Indianola across Puget Sound from Seattle. We needed to get out of the city, and just a third of an acre, and we were trying to figure out what to do. And we were thinking about putting up a canvas yurt. And I was talking to a neighbor, and they said, "Hey, you should check out these wooden yurts." And that was back in 2010. And I was like, "What is that?" And it sounded intriguing. And I went and ended up designing and then building my own house, which is what's shown there in the background. And that was, that's over 10 years ago. And I've been doing it for a living ever since.
Wow. Yeah, this is like I'd never heard about this. I recently did an episode with Topher, and he does buildings too, and he gets into the whole the dome, right? It's all about the dome. And this is an oculus up here?
Yeah, that's actually what I call it. It's a skylight. I refer to it as the oculus. Yeah. And so underneath that glass skylight is a wooden compression ring, 5 foot in diameter. And so that, it acts like an oculus. You can see up and through. But it's also a structural, like a curved glue lamp. So all of the forces of that roof structure are coming down into that compression ring. So it's held in perfect compression. And then at the base of there, you can see it there at the base of the rafter tails, there's steel tension cables going through, and that's holding it in perfect tension at the bottom. So that whole roof system, I mean, you could like lift it up with a crane or a helicopter and just move it somewhere in piece, in one piece. And so it's a pure form of tension and compression. And so you get all of the resonant qualities that go with that. Acoustically, experientially. And it was your podcast with Topher that really inspired me to reach out to you, and you were gracious enough to just respond right away and invite me on. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about this. And Topher, he was just like checking all the boxes for me. He designs round structures. I design round structures. He studied at California Institute of Earth, Art, and Architecture, Cal Earth. He mentioned the Super Adobe domes. I studied there briefly. I took some workshops back in the mid 90s, and as a young architecture student. And I didn't continue down that road, although it sowed a seed for me in terms of designing and building in the round. And so that 20 years later, that manifested into finding this wooden yurt path.
And are there any of these built in Florida? Because I'm just wondering how this would hold up with like a hurricane or something.
Hurricanes,
obviously.
Yeah, on everybody's mind right now. I'll tell you what, I don't think I have any designs in Florida. I've designed over 100 of these, and they're all around the country. But the company that makes these kits, they're prefabricated kits. It's called Smiling Woods Yurts.
Oh, really?
And I'm an independent designer, so I basically I custom design houses for their clients, and so then they take my designs and prefabricate the kit with those wall panels that you see, and then the roof structure.
Oh, wow.
And it comes with siding and windows in. And that's why I like these, because basically any builder can read the assembly manual. And once you get that kit assembled, then from there, it's just like any house building project. So most contractors, you know, if they're qualified and experienced and so forth, they can manage this build. So it's accessible for most people. And then you get all the extra benefits of it's super efficient. It's in the round. There's like 12% less volume to heat and cool in a round structure as compared to a square structure of the same square footage, interestingly enough. And it just like it creates its own natural convection currents. Like if you open up that skylight at the top on a hot day and you open some windows, it's just going to create a natural like a chimney effect, you know, and it'll just move.
Well, you can open up that Oculus. You can like pop it open.
Yeah, it's operable.
Oh wow! Well, hopefully it holds the weight and not like the one on the Titan submarine, right? Supposedly give out.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. No, this is really impressive. Like I said, I'd never looked into this until I started talking to Topher about it. But again, being in Florida, it's a little bit different. All the houses in Puerto Rico are built a certain way because obviously you have the winds of the potential hurricanes that can come with that. And even here in Central Florida, we haven't gotten hit too bad as of recently, but we had a Category 3 does some damage.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not even the strongest, right? Like Category 3 is a 2 is pretty scary. A 3, when Charlie hit us, it knocked the wind out of us for a while. I remember, and that was, I want to say, probably at least 10 years ago, and it took us out of commission for some weeks. So I don't know how this would hold up in Florida. I don't think it would do too well. Unless it would defeat the whole purpose. But could you do the whole structure in like cement or something?
The short answer to that is yes, and then it's you can do it you could form up concrete walls on these for sure. They also have these things called ICFs, insulated concrete forms, which are kind of like Lego blocks that are hollow, and they're like a foot wide, a foot high, and maybe 2 feet long. There's different brands for those. And you stack them up like Legos in sort of whatever shape you want. You could use them for daylight basements, but you can also build the entire house walls out of them. Having said that, these structures, to finish answering your question about the engineering, these are structurally engineered like any house. And these are a lot stronger than a rectilinear or a square house. And the reason is that it's like trying to squeeze an egg. You know, if you push on all sides inward, it's just, you can't, well, probably could, but you can't, if you do it evenly, you can't really crush the egg. And it's the same idea. If you push in on one wall, it's distributing that load throughout all of the walls, right? It's just distributing that load around the house. And the other thing is that, like with a square house, you can imagine a square house can rack, you know, like the walls can just kind of move like this to each other. And so you need the sheathing up on the roof. The plywood acts as a diaphragm to keep the walls from racking. And then you have all these steel hold downs, hurricane straps, and that sort of thing, holding that house, keeping it from racking and holding it to the foundation. With these, you can't uplift any one wall without lifting up the entire house. Right. And so it's that, in fact, these are a lot. I'd feel much better in one of these in a hurricane
really?
than in a square house. Oh, that absolutely. Yeah, any day I'd rather be in this.
It'd be more aerodynamic too. It's round, no?
Yeah, no, exactly. And so the winds would move around it, whereas with the square house, they're just smacking against the side, full frontal. And that, the name Yurts is in the name. Smiling Woods Yurts, the company that produces the kits. My company is Dream Design Build. I'm an independent designer, but we're kind of stuck with the name Yurts because we don't know what else to call them. But when we say yurts, like I don't even use that term with building code officials because they raise an eyebrow and they're like, oh, you can't build yurts here. But because they're thinking about the canvas yurts, right? And wherein these are basically round houses. They're 2x6 framing, wall in the walls, 2x12 roof rafters, and you know these are pretty burly structures.
I'll tell you what, man. If I ever do end up buying some land out here, like plain land, because that's something that is always in the back of my mind, I'm gonna hit you up to see what it would price one of these out. Because essentially, if you really think about it, I mean, I know construction has really gone down the drain as of recently because of the whole costs of all the material and everything, and they're cutting a lot of corners. And here in Florida, I mean, they're overdeveloping a lot. Like it's cookie cutter houses. I mean, I'm in a neighborhood too, cookie cutter houses, and the materials aren't the best. And essentially what they do is they put up, right, the walls are blocks. I mean, they're not filled in or anything. They're just blocks, and then the rest is wood, and then the roof is just wooden as well. I mean, it's just all just, what do they call it? The truss.
Staple trusses.
Yeah, they ship them in on the trucks. They drop them off, and they just lift them in place. And
yeah, they're stapled together. They're made out of cheap 2x4s. I have been building for most of my life, 50 now. So, you know, I've been putting things together for 35 years in houses. And just in that time, I've been watching the quality materials degrade. You know, plywood, they shave off like a 32nd of an inch every couple years, every few years. Same thing with 2x4s, 2x6s. They just keep shaving dimensional lumber down to where it's, you know, and when I was a kid, I used to do renovation work in this 100-year-old house that I grew up in New Jersey. And so I figured out pretty quick that a 2x4 used to be a 2x4, and it was old growth. And, you know, those things last forever and they're so strong. You could build a roof structure with 2x4 rafters then and it would hold up. You know, nowadays you need all sorts of supports and stuff. It's just not the same. They accelerate the growth of the trees. A lot of them are actual GMO trees. And so they grow super fast, but they're soft and spongy and the whole thing. And any builder is familiar with this, trying to like go through racks of lumber at the Home Depot or whatnot and at the lumber yard. And you're just, it's getting harder and harder to find good lumber. So they're moving towards this engineered lumber, and it's like, you know, sawdust and, you know, wood chips and formaldehyde and glue, you know, and yeah, that's like chipboard. OSB is the like chipboard plywood. It's basically what it is, which by the way is extremely flammable, you know, as is everything else that goes into a house these days. You know, houses these days are basically petroleum products, you know.
I mean, that's the American dream. That's
well, that's what we've been
all by design.
Yeah, no, it's completely by design. And it's temporary. Like all these, you know, the type of housing that you're describing, you know, it's like ticky-tacky, you know, houses. It's temporary, man. It's meant to, you know, it's kind of like a car is meant to keep you safe when you get in an accident, but it's also designed to crumple. So you throw the car away, but you live. I feel like it's like that. Houses are designed these days to hold up in a hurricane, to keep the occupants safe, but it's not designed to last more than like, you know, 30, 40, 50 years.
And it's pretty disgusting because that's as long as people usually get their mortgages for, right? 30 years is
there you go,
the longest. So it's all done by design. I think it's the American dream because you got to be asleep to believe it. Is that how the saying goes?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. This is in Prague, right outside of Prague. I was lucky. Yeah, that's right outside of Prague. I was lucky enough to visit there in April, and I met an architect, a Czech architect who brought me to this project that he he designed and built for a Montessori school.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Prague. I've always wanted to go to Prague,
dude. And this is why I reached out to you, because I got excited when Topher was talking about round houses, but when you and him hit on cathedrals as a homunculus for the architects and the builders, I was like, holy shit, like, you just, hairs on the back of my neck standing up, like, I got to talk to you about this, because I've been wrestling with these ideas for a long time. And not to get too far ahead of myself, but what was so incredible about visiting Prague is that it's an intact old world city. Like, it wasn't destroyed in World War II or World War I. So, on the one hand, it's amazing to think that all of Europe looked like this before, the modern epoch rolled over the old world. But just to walk around, like, look at those balls at the top of, every building has those spires and antennas with those balls that are, like, inlaid with gold, and probably have spinning mercury or something inside of them. And all of that stuff is still intact and visible. And so somewhere along my journey, 5, 6, 7 years ago, I got into this idea of the electric universe theory.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites.
Yeah, and realizing that, we've been hoodwinked with modern, scientism, and the idea that, we're sort of disparate objects separated by empty space, we being human beings, being, celestial objects, what have you. And then realizing that, in fact, the ether exists and we're all in it, and consciousness is primary, and all of that stuff started clicking for me. And, like, I was raised Christian, and then so many people have the story where just, like, kicked that to the curb, and, spent 20 years as a devout atheist. And then when I came upon this electric universe theory, I just, like, it occurred to me that science and spirituality are not opposed to each other, that they're actually two sides of a coin. And that's what that opened up for me. But it also opened up the idea that these old world buildings are doing something with the ether. They're, and then this, again, like 5, 6, 7 years ago, just started going down this never ending rabbit hole of discovery, and which led to me starting my own YouTube channel, Marvelous Old World, where I just, had to start putting these ideas together and putting them out. So, yeah, when you
know who this is here? Is this like Cain and Abel or something going on here? What's going on?
I am not sure. That's a great question.
Do you know what the name of this building is?
That it's a government building. And it might even be, I don't want to misspeak. It might even be like the presidential palace or something. That is up on, there's Prague Castle, I think it's called. There's a cathedral up there. It's like when you're in Prague,
it's Prague Castle.
Yeah, there you go, Prague Castle. There's so many things that are drawing your attention, but way up on the hill, across the Charles River, is a castle cathedral complex, and this building is up there, and it's just mind-blowing. It's absolutely breathtaking. So, and you feel it. I really feel like when I was up there that you can just feel the energy of it.
So they're titans. They're fighting giants. Okay. The Giant's Gate, wrestling titans. Sculptures into the courtyard of the Prague Castle on the Czech Republic. Yeah, the reason I've studied Rudolph II. Obviously, he was in Prague, and you have the legend of the golem in Prague.
Yes.
It's a very magical place.
Yes, the whole Jewish quarter there, I did a tour of that, and
Did you go to the alchemist lab, bro?
Yes, I did.
Oh, that's sick.
Are you talking about the underground
Yeah.
alchemical complex that they discovered
Yeah.
when they were doing some remodeling? Yeah, and realized that this building had a whole underground that was connected by tunnels to the king's castle, basically, and he would sneak out, past his own guard, and go hang out with the alchemists and who were mixing their brews and medicines and concoctions and whatnot in this underground lab, which it's still there. It's still intact. I mean, it's incredible that you can actually go and visit this.
Yeah, they got the alchemist alley is what they call it, I think.
Alchemist Alley, huh?
Yeah, so alchemist alley. The alley is present name to the goldsmiths. According to the legend, these goldsmiths were the alchemists of Emperor Rudolph II, who had a passion for alchemy. And I mean, he had a whole court of alchemists because he was he was an alchemist. So he was more concerned about the occult than he was actually about ruling. And I mean, that's where, for me, with the whole building stuff, I study mostly the occult symbolism, esoteric subjects, alchemy, and it never bled into, because I have this other friend of mine, homie Romy, who he talks about antiquated transhumanism and like old ancient tech and the buildings, and how maybe perhaps these crowns weren't what we've been told that they were for. Like, these crowns might have been like these directed energy weapons, I guess, for lack of a better word, like, that they would put on and use, right? They're sitting on stones too. You have the whole idea of the Ben stone. And then my research led me studying John Dee, studying Paracelsus. I stumbled across this idea of Pythagorean palaces, and I'd never heard about that. Also, I studied Pythagoras, so I was familiar with Pythagorean symbolism and their numerology and all that, and I never heard about Pythagorean palaces. Well, it turns out it's a concept, and I was able to get a hold of the book. Now, unfortunately, that book, the cost of it since I started talking about it has tripled almost, and it reads like the guy was an architect. He was an esotericist with Renaissance architecture. His name is, let me find him here. I bought all his books. George L. Hersey. Now, you can find the book on archive.org. You can find it. So, Pythagorean Palaces, Magic and Architecture in the Italian Renaissance. And when you read it, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of verbiage as far as, like, architectural verbiage. But the concepts behind the architecture back then, there was a lot of woo-woo involved. So you have feng shui, you have geomancy, which are actual concepts. They're actual things, right? They're actual ideas of laying out structures in a favorable way, right? In a way that can either promote good energy flow. Well, that's also alchemy, because alchemy also involves the manipulation of matter on the physical plane, as well as the metaphysical plane, so the upper dimensions. And this book reads like a regular architectural book, but then he'll throw in some stuff. For example, only the initiates know where these hidden corridors are. Like, every now and again, he'd drop a nugget like that. I'm like, this guy's kind of obscure. Not a lot about him. Right? He's got probably 6 or 7 books. I have all of them, I believe, because I bought them all. Because I'm like, maybe I stumbled across like some grimoire, some type, right? Maybe some sort of code or something embedded into it. And the further I looked into it, the idea of the architect as magician, which I did a whole episode on that I think it's episode 119, and I interviewed the professor who wrote that book, the Architect as Magician, and he goes way deep. But the idea that architects were essentially demiurges to these buildings that they were building, and then you would have almost like these battles that would go on where all these families would, the reason that they would up their building is because they wanted it to resonate more than the next family. So if yours had, 14 windows, well, mine had 33 windows. My homunculi was better than yours, or my homunculus was better than yours. And they quite literally called these buildings homunculus because the way that they saw it was these architects were practicing a sort of manifestation where the idea exists here, and this, how you're saying, this plasma universe, right? It's floating around, and then it's impregnated into your mind, right? It's impregnated, and it turns into a fetus. It starts to grow, is what they call it. I mean, this is all in the literature. It's a fetus, and then you birth that model into either a little model or a drawing, right? It's another form of projecting that idea, manifestation, and then the last phase is the actual building itself. And whenever something about interdimensionalism starts to step into the equation, like that really perks me up because I love Dungeons and Dragons, magic, and all this other stuff, like the movie magic, like the stuff that's like cool, right? Like Wizards and all these shows, like that type of stuff. And he starts to get into, well, there's occulted scaffolding in these buildings, and there's hidden things. And I'm like, what are you trying to get at? Because in all these movies that we've ever seen, like Harry Potter, that alleyway, right? You're talking about the Alchemist Alley. Well, that wall at the train station that you're able to run through, right? You're able to run through it because it's a portal. Well, in structures, the portal is the arc, right? You have the archway.
Yeah.
And you go through the portal, and then sometimes if you look at that picture that you had, the one that you had where it was did I take it away? I guess I took it away. Oh, no, I didn't. This right here. These, and then you start to see this sort of stuff. Like, wait, are they dealing with cymatics?
They sure are.
And maybe again, because for those that are thinking like, oh, Dungeons and Dragons and Wizards and Warlocks and all this, that's silly. Well, that's fine, right? All is mental. If you want to go there, all is mental, right? It's all in your head, and you're just making these things up in your mind. Well, what if they're manipulating not energies again that you're able to see, but energies on a higher level of reality, on a different dimension? So you start to get into interdimensional architecture, and maybe these buildings are resonating on different frequencies, therefore different dimensions, which some of them you can't comprehend. So there's a reason why maybe when you walk into a room that's cut off at the door, right, you forget something because maybe you're cutting that off, right? There's talks of like your astral body being tugged around by a silver cord, or all these ideas, and maybe these little things up here are just doors for your astral body to come through, right? So they can either mine it or whatever it is, and these ideas, again, you have people like Fulcanelli who could have been trolls. They could have been trolling people. Who knows? I mean, they're alchemists. They're a secret society. They believed that certain people couldn't attain the knowledge because it was sacred, right? So you have that aspect. You have to keep that in mind. And how Manly P. Hall says, woe to those who, paraphrasing, accept the ramblings of an alchemist to the T. I'm paraphrasing it, but again, be weary of what you're taking it. But a lot of times you have to read through the lines too, right? So you have Fulcanelli talking about how all these cathedrals, well, they're actually what they were meant to be was a way of record keeping and to invoke spiritual experiences, epiphanies for people. You have churches that they attribute the the different miracles in the church, not to God, but to the actual structure itself, right? So you have that idea of, well, are we experiencing some, well, what's theurgy? Well, theurgy is using powers from up above. Okay. Well, when you go to church, that's theurgical, right? You're asking for help from up above. But then in the Pythagorean Palace, what if you can incorporate both of them? What if you could build a building to a certain geometric proportion to elevate everyone's consciousness within that building to bring them closer to the Godhead?
Yes.
And then you get into the whole idea of Freemasons. Well, Masons, they're all about buildings. Or you have Hiram Abiff. Or you have all those concepts. You got to do something with buildings. That the Knights Templar, which were responsible for a lot of the cathedrals that were built, they were trying to perhaps maybe alchemize and transmute the entire world by bringing these buildings into existence. Like there's a lot of dots that need to be connected, but that's where my research led me. And again, I'm still peeling the layers back, but it all started with this Pythagorean Palace idea by this G.L. Hersey guy. And yeah, I don't know, he was onto something, and I think that it's being used even in the, so we're talking about their buildings today. Well, the same way that you can build a building to elevate people's consciousness, you can easily invert that. So think about the houses that they're putting us in now, where they're all the same. They all have the same angles, right? So what are they doing? And then they want to put everybody in 15-minute cities. Well, the memory palace, part of that manifestation of these concepts is that you're able to manipulate the energy within the actual building through the use of a model. The same concept for remote viewing. So think about why they want to put you in a 15-minute city and lay everyone out and be able to access everyone, maybe not physically, but maybe some sort of metaphysical way.
Yeah. They, our town built a new elementary school or a new middle school just a few blocks from here. And, we were excited, and brand new school, and what a privilege and all this. And then, I was watching it while they were building it, and it was made out of steel studs, not wood, but steel studs. And I just had a holy shit moment where I realized, wow, they're building a huge Faraday cage that is going to trap all of that negative dissonant EMF pollution within the building, which the kids are just, and there's just no end of the devices whirling around in there. And that, realizing, well, yeah, my kids are subjected to that. And that sucks. But that's like the antithesis of what we're talking about with a building that's, with alchemical principle, actual alchemy, infused. And this is like the Western esoteric tradition, right? Versus as opposed to the Feng Shui. And there's a lot of, there's a big Venn diagram, and they complement each other. But the Western tradition, yeah, it's not the building as opposed to God. And that's, I think, a mistake of the modern age. Again, seeing science and religion, or science and spirituality, to be more precise, as antithetical to each other, but that you have science at the service of a higher divine principle and bringing us closer to God. So, for instance, yeah, if you build a cathedral with piezoelectric materials, stone crystalline stone, granite, marble with quartz, so forth, put under pressure, creating charge, drawing to it, acting as an antenna and as a receiver. And then you're building that on ley lines, and you're building it, usually they're built over a river, an underground water source, which is conductive and creating an electrical current. And then you have on the roof, you have copper and gold, and these spires that are going up into the atmosphere. And then they have, like fractal antennas all over the place on these roofs. And then to add to that, you've got a massive rose window, like you pointed to, that has, it's reflective of, like the cymatic resonance of that particular structure, as Topher was pointing out. And then you have a pipe organ with like 40,000 tones, some of which are not even audible to the human ear, which is curious, like why you'd go through that trouble. And that's playing and blasting through the rose window and out into the community. So it's not just the people.
It's the Eye of Sauron or whatever it's called from the Lord of the Rings, pretty much.
Well, I mean, I can see it as something that's actually uplifting the vibration of the entire village around it. Wouldn't you think that it's all of this is elevating everybody and every
to combat that, the reason that they use these pictures and it was meant for the peasant class that couldn't read, right? So they would put these pictures on these cathedrals so that those people, right, the poor people, could come and have those experiences, and therefore, in my opinion, have more of a grasp on them, right? To make them feel lesser than what they actually are, because like, okay, well, there's a higher power than me. And if you look at religion, I'm not bashing religion, but if you look at religion now, it's a brokered experience. So you can, and that's why they knocked out the Gnostics and all these other religions, because the Gnostics, they would believe that you could achieve divinity through your own self, through your gnosis. Gnosis is whatever sacred knowledge is to you, right? It's your journey. It's individual. Yeah. Well, what happened to the Gnostics? We know what happened to them. They got wiped out by the church. Why? Because you can't be preaching that you can achieve divinity wherever you are. No. You have to come to us. We'll talk to the guy upstairs for you, right? You come every single Sunday. And then you get into the idea of the manipulation of subtle energy, which is what you're talking about, right, where you do a ritual, a ceremony every single Sunday here in this exact spot. And every single Sunday you come back and you're whirling you're sending that energy out into the ether. It's coming back. And you send it back out again every single Sunday, just back into you. And that's powerful, right? So, and that's how they sink their teeth deeper into you. So you can only achieve divinity through us being the establishment, being organized religion. And they wipe out anybody. What'd you say that you can achieve? What did Jesus say? You have turned my house into a den of thieves, right? I mean, hello, right? You're not. You can worship God anywhere you are. It doesn't matter. You don't have to be at a certain place at a certain time to be able to, God's not only going to listen to you on Sunday, he's going to listen to you whenever you want. You can just pray to him right now if you wanted to, right? So I think that's by design to make people have these experiences, sometimes even supernatural, because again, Pentecostal. So I know about when they're running around and jumping and doing all this stuff. I know about the atmosphere, right? And it really locks you in. And when you're letting people have these experiences, they're like, okay, we'll let you guys handle that, and we'll just show up and pay our taxes and pay our tithings and everything else, and we'll just listen to whatever. And again, it's a form of MK Ultra, man. I mean, you got the lights, you got the sound
at that level, yes. But do you think, Juan, that the cathedrals were built by the brokering forces that you mentioned that are, mediating the peasants' relationship with the divine? Do you think that those are the ones that created the cathedrals? Or because part of me, and I some of this is just going on, intuition, feels like these were created by a higher mind, and then they were somehow usurped. And this is something that I'm wrestling with, and I wonder what your opinion on that is.
The whole Tartarian stuff, Atlantis, whatever you want to call it. I like the idea. I don't think that they were built by anybody. I think that they were built by who they were built by, and they were able to build them through alchemical means. If you follow the story of the Knights Templar and you get into the woo-woo of it, well, they were able to establish this vast banking empire that I mean, is even alive till today. It's an alchemical system through the use of divination, through the use and the prophecies of, again, forces from another dimension, if you will, because if you get into the whole Baphomet storyline and what that entitles, right? The invocation or evocation of an entity that's outside space and time. Well, that's ultra-terrestrial or extraterrestrial, whatever you want to call it. But they were simply portraying the information and giving the secrets to the Knights Templar in order for them to be able to establish this banking system in order. And I mean, if you, and there's the other side of it, to where the Knights Templar stole the secret from, I think it was Nicholas Flamel, actually. They had acquired the secret of how to create lead to gold. And the reason that they were able to fund all these buildings was through the use of this alchemy, right? Through the use of the Philosopher's Stone or this secret. So depending on which way you look at it, I think that they were able to build it. I think that they were able and they acquired now the knowledge is what they acquired from outside sources. I think that's where the outside intervention would come. That's in my opinion, because you have the people who think like, oh, well, a race of people. And that's funny that they have the giants outside the palace there, right? The Titans, right? The giants built this. The giant, right? You have all these crazy, really big doors and just weird stuff. So maybe the giants built it, right? But I think that people did build it, and they were trying to do something much. The original use was lost, and I think that maybe because you have places like the pyramids of Giza, right? It's not a cathedral, but I have a buddy of mine. I've never been there, but I have a buddy of mine who tells me that whenever you go into the pyramids of Giza, you can feel the energy almost as if it's not working. It's no longer working. It used to work. It used to be this power source, and it's working maybe at 0.0001 of its capacity. But when you enter the pyramid, you can feel the change in the atmosphere. You can feel that energy as soon as you walk in, right? So again, do I agree with the more advanced people built it and they were taken over? No, I don't. I don't believe that. Okay. I believe maybe the people who had the knowledge and acquired it through these means of interacting with forces outside of space and time. I think maybe that's more, because when you get into, and that's the beautiful thing about alchemy, that when you start to get into these hermetic buildings or alchemical buildings, alchemy involves, again, interdimensionalism, entities outside of space and time. It involves everything. And that's what I love about the topic, because it operates on, how Manly P. Hall says, the alchemist is working on 4 different levels simultaneously in order to achieve the magnum opus, right? So, yeah, I don't agree 100% with that, but I am aware of the Tartarian crowd and how they always talk about how all these cities were, and one of the, what really did it for me, the whole Tartarian stuff, was there was this channel, I think it's called AWAR or something like that.
Yes, AWAR.
AWAR, and one of the videos that he had done where they were going through these palaces or whatever, and a lot of them were made out of plaster. A lot of the walls were made to look like marble when they actually weren't marble. A lot of them, when they were demolishing them, they were buckling because, again, they were like made out of plywood, right? And it's like it didn't break how it was supposed to, and it's like bouncing off the ground. It's like, well, yeah, it's plaster and wood. So I'm like, okay, you have the whole cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, because and the reason René Descartes said that was because he couldn't trust his senses. So you get into this idea, right, of the manipulation of senses to make you believe something else. And sometimes you got to look at you have to look at it from different perspectives. And when you're looking at it from one point of view, right, you're looking at all these crazy pictures and everything from the outside, these world fairs, you weren't actually there to knock on the plywood and check, oh, this isn't even meant to last. You know what I'm saying? Like we're focusing on one perspective of it, if that makes any sense. And that's what those were the videos that really did it in for me. And I was like, not saying that they're all plywood, but
no. Ewar, he whatever his real name is, he refuted his own work and went on a big apology tour. to a fault, I think, because I think he was onto some things and maybe just kind of got ahead of actually being able to like validate some of the things that he was putting out there. So let's see which to jump into. I just did a whole like hour and a half long video conversation with Great Deception podcast, Matt T over there, and about the Chicago World's Fair in particular. And I've been looking at those very closely and through the eye of as an architect and as a builder. So yes, none of us were there, and yet each of them have left structures behind that are awfully real. Like the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry was the Palace of Fine Arts.
Which I've been there.
Have you been there? Yes. I mean, it's a phenomenal structure, and I would defy anybody to demonstrate how that one building could be built from planning to turnkey execution, and then housed with all of this, world-class art collection in 2 years. Like, I don't, just want that one building, and there was 200 buildings. So, were some of those buildings there before? I've been exploring the idea that much of our old world building stock in the United States up into Canada has been here for a long time, a lot longer than the history books would let on. There's a couple of really great Instagram channels that just put up photos. You might have seen them, like Old World Architecture, New York, Old Architecture of New York, or something like this. There's a few of them, and it's just one after the other. Like, I'm starting to think that half of these are virtual creations, because every time I see a new one, it blows my mind. I'm like, how the hell did I not see this one before? Each one is a masterpiece. And I think of everything that would have taken to put that one building together, and there's just no end of them. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. More than half of them, probably most of them, have been destroyed in the 20th century. And then you look at the dates of construction, and they're always like 1889, 1892. And it's like, what the hell was going on in 1889, from 1889, which, by the way, was when the Seattle fire, the Great Fire of Seattle was, and the early 1890s, where there was just, if the history books are correct, then there was just this absolute unrivaled renaissance of great architecture and construction that was going on. But at the same time, the country was facing an economic depression. We were just kind of getting ourselves back together after tearing ourselves apart during the Civil War. And there was all of these urban fires that were happening, just before and during and after that period, where city after city after city, these old world downtown cores were being incinerated one after the other, which, by the way, doesn't even have a mention in our history books other than the Chicago fire. Well, it happened in almost every city, and just like, I just released a video yesterday about comparing Seattle's Great Fire of 1889 to what just happened in Lahaina. And the more I looked at it, the similarities were really uncanny. So I did it was a very difficult video to put together, but comparing and contrasting those events and looking at just, what I'm looking at as reset fires. Mm-hmm. So the whole exploration of the world fairs has to be looked at alongside of the fact that our cities, I'm absolutely 100% convinced that our cities go back much earlier than like 1889, 1890. And then you have this whole overlay of, the actual history books, what they say. And, you have like architects like H.H. Richardson, who I've looked into. And so he's one of the three pillars of American architecture alongside Louis Sullivan and Frank Lloyd Wright. And but at this point, I just think he's a complete fabrication. He had a career that spanned 20 years. He was very sickly through most of it. He's attributed with like 80 just absolute masterworks, like the State House in Albany for New York, like Trinity Church in Albany, like actual masterpieces of world architecture. And he's got, he has like 80 of those to his credit. He went to Harvard. He was in like 3 of these Skull and Bones type social clubs, the Porcelainian Club, however you pronounce that, which their mascot is a boar or a pig, which is curious. Mm-hmm. But that's like the Harvard version of Skull and Bones. And he spent, the books about him say that he spent most of his time socializing and fraternizing and not really studying. And so, and then he went to the École des Beaux-Arts to escape having to serve in the Civil War. And then he came back, and again, he had, if you kind of narrowed down him getting out of school and before he got too sick to actually produce, it's like 10, 15 years. And so, yeah, I just don't see, there's no gravitas in his backstory as, this, a genius creator. I don't see it. And yet he's given credit for not just all of these buildings, but being the godfather of American Romanesque architecture. So that's the same thing, like Richardsonian Romanesque is. And so if you look at like the county courthouses, like the Spokane County Courthouse, which is, fortunately still there, or, Tacoma, Washington, just to pick Washington. These are unbelievably marvelous old world buildings, and they're supposed to be Richardsonian Romanesque. But so at this point, I just concluded that this Romanesque style, America had its own Romanesque movement in architecture, but it definitely preceded 1890. And unfortunately, yeah, like so much of it has been disappeared because I just think the modern age doesn't know what to do with these buildings.
Yeah, it's Antiqui-tech. I mean, it's a form of antiquity that they don't know how to tap into it. It makes no sense to them. So again, that's why I feel like maybe they're the people who held the secrets were, undone with, or again, it's a form of secret society, like these alchemists. And I agree with you. There is a lot of even alchemists that I've studied, and the history cannot be trusted. I mean, that's 100%. Right? You got to take everything for what it is. You mentioned earlier about the school and how they build these schools a certain type of way. We're constantly bombarded with frequencies in our homes of our Wi-Fi, 5G. They have even my router has 6G or 7G or something like that. Something crazy.
7G now? Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah, it's got like some crazy frequency on it. And again, we're constantly being bombarded by these things. So what is that doing? We don't really know if frequencies are able to split water molecules.
Yes.
Right down.
It's making us sick. There's no question at all that this stuff is making us sick. That book, Invisible Rainbow, goes into, all, from the outset, when they ran electrical wires over the railroad, it connected a dissonant circuit of radiation that was making the train riders sick. And this is, back in the 1890s, early 1900s.
This is crazy to look at.
Right. Right. What's going on there? Yeah. And and so that was the earliest iteration of the grid that they were shoehorning into these older cities that
now this, not to cut, sorry to interrupt, but this is still present, except it's under our feet.
Right. It doesn't go away. That's right.
It doesn't go away. It's the occulted, right? They just occulted the wiring underneath. Yeah.
Yeah. So, this is just electricity has been around for as long as existence has been around, because that's the nature of reality. And so, I believe that the alchemists understood it. Of course, like, Tesla's, whether he invented or just kind of channeled, an understanding of this Antiqui-tech type Tesla technology. Absolutely. There's, and I believe that is what these old buildings were doing. And so I've looked at, Seattle. There was just to focus on Seattle, because that's where I am. And I've looked into it, and a lot of my videos are looking at old world Seattle before the Great Fire that just wiped out the downtown. All of these fires seem to somehow focus just on the business district. And by the way, all the backstories of these fires has some silly, like cartoon story of a cow kicking over.
It was the cigar
being tossed into a pile of moss, and yeah. And then they all say the same thing, that these cities were made out of matchsticks and just ready to go up in flames, and that there was no building codes. And it's all nonsense, because when you look at the photos of the aftermath of these fires, you see masonry buildings in ruins, brick, stone, and ornate ruins that are just incinerated, and all of that is very curious. But the buildings that were there before, they're really they're large scale, like 14-foot, 15-foot ceilings, 10-foot windows and doors, masonry, or completely ornate masonry structures. So, like, one simple question is, how are they heating these? And you're going to tell me there were wood burning fireplaces in each of them, or did they have some other means?
Have you seen the huge fireplaces?
Right.
I was only ever able to find those one time. Like, they're like these huge fireplace, like huge, like the size of a person. And I'm like, why would you need a fireplace that big? And ever since the first time I saw them, I haven't ever been able to find pictures of them again.
Well, I'm going to be talking to Dave Zed, for sure, about like how this, because I want to just dial in on how this Antiqui-tech actually could work. How can there's been this talk of the radiant fireplaces, where those two where's my camera? There's two stanchions that are like with brass balls, or gargoyle or something, and then the idea that that's connecting a circuit that, and I've seen pictures of those buildings in ruins where you'll see a copper strap going up into the attic, into connected to antennas, or spires, and then down into the foundation, and that sure does look like a circuit. And if it was put arranged in such a way, could you actually use that to create heat? And I think the indication is that, yeah, I'd like to understand it better. But I think that the ancients, our ancestors, really understood this stuff, and then you get into who really did build these, and it's an open question, and it's a fascinating one. It's I think it's one that we'll be exploring for a long time. But I think we're just sort of entering into a age, call it the apocalypse, where people are starting to wake up from a long sleep.
This is the just flipping through this book here, the Pythagorean Palaces, and the idea of the occulted scaffolding. Here he's gets into like visualization and all these different concepts. And I'm like, is this really a book about architecture? Is there something more to this? And I think that, again, I agree with you, trying to find the use. Right, I think who built these buildings is one argument, and then what was the purpose for them is another argument, because you could also argue that, like, why so lavish, why so big, what could you possibly need a building like this for? And again, this book goes really deep. And when I
So what
first,
do they mean by scaffolding in this? Is it metaphoric?
yeah, so the occulted scaffolding, which you can apply to anything, and it gets into the idea of things that are implanted during the process. And this is why it's so important for people who don't believe in magic or the occult. It doesn't matter, because if the magician that was creating whatever it was put his intention, right, alchemically into the project at the end of the day, and you're using it, you're carrying that intention without you knowing it. So what he gets into the occulted scaffolding is these lines, these hidden corridors, these hidden arches that are drawn on the the blueprints of the building, I guess you'd call them, that are then erased, right? And if you take that concept and you extrapolate it and put it to really anything, what were the intentions of that director, right? Cinemagician. And when making that movie, writing that script, creating that character, what's going on behind the scenes that then is being put out. The concept is different than the final product, but you still have all this occulted scaffolding that was associated, that was later erased from the concept to give you the final model. That has power, and not only, but then you get into the whole concept of the building themselves are talismans. The building themselves are magic, right? The building themselves were used in a theurgical way. The reason that churches are built the way they're built, right, to direct the energy. Those, to me, those are the directed energy weapons. Shout out to Emily Moyer. Those are the directed, because they use the media, they use all this stuff, and they lock people's consciousness in these buildings. Topher talked about it. They're mandalas. I never thought about that. The domes are mandalas. What are mandalas for? Right. They're devices, technology to take your consciousness and it transports it. Where does it transport it? I have zero clue. But we know that, again, using the Masons, because they're the most, they're the punching bag of the occult world, I guess, right? The conspiracy realm, their lodges, right? The color schemes, the layouts, it's all done in a geomantic way for them to do their ceremonies, right? Colors play a big. So here, it's the idea of the dome, right? So you have the angels spiraling around within so think about this. Think about this right here. If let's say you're in one of these old, it's the I don't even know how far back it goes. Let's say it's an old century. You're in a church, and we know back then that they like to use stalks of Mary Jane, right? And they would burn them, and the priest or whoever it was would go down the aisles and do his chants, and he was hotboxing everybody in the church. Everyone's getting hotboxed. And you look and you start to feel real good, because the stuff back then was probably a lot stronger than it is today. You start to look up and you start to see things, because of the colors of the glass, right? The glass is made a certain alchemical way. I mean, we know this, that there's people who they're initiated to learn the arts of creating this glass. Like, there's glass that they find at places that it's Tiffany glass. This is worth millions of dollars. Because the process in which they built that was, again, either kept secret between a tight group of people. They had to be initiated to learn the art of how to do it. Again, it's magic. It's magical is what I'm getting at. So you look up and you start to see something like this, and you go, you're tripping your balls off, and you're going, okay, this is crazy. And you go, it's got to be the building. There's got to be something more to this reality. And again, it's all by design, in my opinion. But
absolutely,
he gets into all this, dude. I mean, it's and what I love about talking to you is that you're an actual architect, so you know about this stuff. I mean, this is what you do for a living. So the buildings is not something that you just watched a couple YouTube videos on. You're like, hey, there's something fishy going on here. It's like, no, I agree with you. There's definitely something that's afoot, and we can't take what they've told us with 100%. I 100% agree with you on that we have to investigate and find out the purpose of these places.
You reminded me of story of when I was in Prague. I'm walking around by myself, of course, at night. And it's the kind of city that you can just turn any corner and you're just going to see another cathedral, another extraordinary building. So I hit a joint, right? So I'm walking around and it's at night. And so I wasn't looking for anything in particular except to get eventually back to my apartment. And I hear singing coming from what looked from the outside like a very modest cathedral or chapel. And, if I saw that in Seattle, it'd be like the best building in town. But so I approach it and I hear music coming. And so I walk up the grand stair and by now I'm like stoned. And I realize, wow, it's like a Wednesday, but there's service going on. So I'm like, what the hell? I haven't been to Catholic Mass in years. So I walk in and just immediately I was hit by the sensory, like it wasn't overload, but it was like really intense. The aromas, the incense, and the parishioners were standing up, and the priest is delivering a sermon in Czech. So I don't understand anything, but I can, I got the cadence and everything, and from growing up, Catholic, and then a band in the front plays, and the place is filled with music. And this is the first time really that I can say that I've had an experience. And I just knelt down in the back. There was a few other people kneeling down on the floor in the back. And this is the first time that I really put it together that, there's all this stuff going on in in cathedrals, and you can study them to a point, but at a point, you just have to experience it. You just have to be present and experience it. And when the music, like, it just made everything vibrate. Everything was lifted. And I just felt my spirit like coming up and up. Regardless of who built it, regardless of for what end, like that experience I had was so uplifting. Mm-hmm. And it didn't have to do, there was a certain, a certain intention on the part of the priest delivering his sermon. And I couldn't understand the words, but I certainly felt the intention. And then when the Mass ended, what was so interesting was seeing the congregation break up into family units. And that was one thing that really struck me about Prague, was how intact the family structure is, by the way. It just felt like nostalgic in an interesting way because, anyway, because our society has just been so fragmented.
Yeah. And do you know what religion was it? Was it Catholic that they were?
Yeah, it was for sure. It was Catholic. Yeah.
Interesting.
And then I came to find out that these cathedrals, and they have the chapels along the side going down, and those are tuned. Those are tuned to different frequencies, so you can perform different, Gregorian chants or what have you, in each, specific to each chapel on, just in a corner of this building. It's really, the understanding of natural law is profound, and its connection to the divine, and I think there's a higher purpose. I really do believe that there's a higher purpose to those structures that may have been hijacked in some cases, maybe is intact in others. You mentioned crowns before. Homie Romy talked about, I believe you said the crown having an actual function. Now,
what's the wand called? The specter, I think it's called.
You're right. Yeah, that definitely looks like maybe a pharaoh's staff or something. But crowns, like, what a vajra is? Yeah.
No.
Like if you just type in vajra, V-A-J-R-A. V-A-J-R-A, and pull up what you see there, and it'd be an Indian. Looks like a device.
Yeah, I've seen.
Have you seen those before?
Yeah, let me pull it up here. I think it's got like Star Wars. What the heck? Let's see here. I'll pull this one up. This thing.
Yeah, there you go. So those come in, many variations, and but that's the gist of it. And it's interesting that I believe in Sanskrit, vajra means both diamond and lightning. So yeah. And so for it to mean diamond and lightning, that gets into the whole electric universe theory and the idea that, like, lightning or plasma rearranges elements and groups elements together. So I've heard of like miners looking for gold veins, diamond veins alongside where, traditional narrative storytellers would say that, a dragon struck the ground back, in the distant past or something like this. So do these devices have, or are these devices, is a question. And you see them on top of bells where these, and so they also they look like Z pinches. So there's talk about how stars are within the electric universe theory. Those physicists talk about how stars are formed around Birkeland currents at the Z pinch, where the plasma filament kind of twists around itself and there's a focal point, and that's where perhaps stars. So the idea that stars are actually powered from without as opposed to within, being nuclear furnaces. So it's an alternative view of actual function of stars, but those look like a diagram of Z pinches. And so I've thought for a long time, and this is where I was going, is that crowns look an awful lot like vajras. Like that looks like a crown on top of that bell, or it could look like half of a vajra.
And also the idea, so another important aspect to all of this, because and we haven't even gotten into the bells. The bells is also a very interesting concept.
Yeah.
And so trying to find out who built these buildings, what they were used for. And there's also something we have to keep in mind, that maybe perhaps these buildings are only active during certain periods of time, during certain times of year, certain times of the day, right? Certain astrological alignments, because that's also important. So maybe they're not working always at 100%, perhaps because it's not the correct alignment of everything. Time, day, year, month, right? Pluto's not in Gatorade or whatever it is that they say, right? All this stuff. I mean, that plays a role into all that, because alchemy, again, is the manipulation. You have to make sure that the celestial bodies are in correct alignment before you do your process.
No, that's a very interesting thought. I haven't heard. I mean, if you think about stone circles, there's to where they're like Newgrange. If you go there on the spring equinox, you get to see the light shaft coming through the oculus and striking the stone at the center at just the right time of the year. So that's interesting. Our cathedrals or perhaps pyramids activated when Pluto's in Gatorade.
And the reason I say that is because another thing that my buddy that's been to he shot a few documentaries at the Pyramid of Giza, the room in which I believe Crowley did the Cairo workings and got in touch with Ayahuasca, which is important too. The box there, I think it's the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber. I always get them mixed up, but wherever the box is that's broken.
That's the King's Chamber, I believe.
You're able to lay down in there. Now they don't let you chant or hum anything if you're there publicly, but if you're in a private group, they you can do whatever you want. And he goes with a certain group that they think outside the box. They're not just stuck with the mainstream narrative of these things are only 6,000 years old, whatever, et cetera, dynastic Egyptians,
Tombs.
they're tombs, all that stuff. And he laid down in the box and they started to chant at a certain frequency. And he said that the box vibrated so violently while he was in it that he needed to get out. Now, before I hopped on with you, I was watching the new one of the newest Flash movies. Spoiler alert for those that haven't seen it yet, but I don't know how much of a spoiler it is, but he's able to walk through walls by lining up his molecules to be the same frequency as the wall, and he's able to pass through the wall. He's also able to, I didn't even know about this about Flash, he's also able to time travel and open up wormholes and stuff. Again, it's crazy. I was watching it with my son, and it just makes me think of that. What if these people were able to, again, chant a certain frequency and dissolve out of this reality? We have idea, and I know I'm getting woo-woo, but a lot of these ancient civilizations that disappeared, well, what if they were able to ascend as a people together? Like how you're saying, this congregation coming together in this cathedral, they hum a certain tone. Next thing you know, everyone disappeared to the 13th dimension, whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like just thinking outside the box. And the idea that, and the concept that Crowley was able to contact this allegedly outside entity, this Iowas that prophesies to him their main text, really, of the Thelemic order. Almost like you were able to get in touch with this ultra-terrestrial or extraterrestrial while being in that room. Now, like I said, woe to those who take the allegorical ramblings of these alchemists or occultists at 100%. You always have to use discernment with these people, because I do think that some of this is mental. A lot of these aspects are mental. But yeah, just an interesting topic that a concept that I've always thought about, that maybe they were able to attune themselves to this frequency and just piece out of this dimension, and that would account for all the similar pyramid structures around the world of different cultures and different civilizations who had nothing in touch with one another. They never met. They were, Mesoamerican and Mesopotamian, but they had the same gods, goddesses, iconography, symbols, structures. What if they were just tapping into something that, right, was manifesting to them a certain type of way, according to whatever, wherever they were geographically, right? You know what I'm saying? So
were they channeling? Were they channeling structural, forms, or
it's the whole Vimana stuff too. I mean, on the whole, you brought up that piece. This is the Vimanas, right? They're supposedly these spaceships that these gods, and I mean they use mandalas too.
So reality is much, much, much stranger and more mysterious and profound than our day to day would let on. So that it's the question is not whether or not these strange things are true, but knowing they are, proceed with caution and be careful. Be careful what you and who you invite in, and
absolutely. This is my personal. These are my personal opinions, right? Not everyone's gonna agree, but that's just what I think. I think that the truth is stranger than fiction, and that there is a lot more to this reality that we don't even begin to comprehend, right? And we're working on so many different layers, and just think about this. I mean, for those that are listening that think that this is too woo woo. There is a grown-ass man wearing this, sitting on some throne in some castle, cathedral maybe, wearing this and passing it along to his entire family. So back again, doesn't matter if you don't believe it, because that occulted scaffolding, back to the same concept, because they believe it, and if it is just role-playing and LARPing, they're doing it. Look at these guys. They're having a great old time exerting their power over people, and they believe it. They believe to have some power. Oh, the Habsburgs? Yeah, the Habsburgs. Oh, they just so happen to be that the entire family and their lineage, they would grow up in the same Pythagorean palace that was built to the specifications of Solomon's temple. And they're all buried there. But I'm sure that's just a coincidence, right? El Escorial is the place where they're all buried, right? The Habsburgs. And the palace there is supposedly built to the specifications of Solomon's temple. But hey, I'm just, this is just, I'm sure it's a coincidence, bro. I don't know.
Yeah, the power is real, and the source
right here. Look at this. Let's go there. Floor plan based on the floor plan of Solomon's temple. Yikes!
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah,
I didn't know that. Yeah, so it's, are you serving, like, who are you serving? You can't serve two masters. Are you at the service of the divine and humanity and elevating our condition, or um, the antithesis of that, which is what we're suffering through during our dark age that we're in now. But these people are definitely controlling and manipulating and feeding off of the souls and lifeblood of humans currently.
100%. Yeah.
It can't last, and it won't last because they are in opposition to natural law and divine law. And so yeah, it's a matter of time. And maybe that's why they're going for broke right now, is because they do know that their time is short. It's like the movie Dark City.
I still haven't seen that movie, man. I gotta watch that movie. That's
you better put that at the top of your list. Yeah, you're gonna. Yeah, I won't
spoil it. That was the movie that they were trying to occult with The Matrix, is what I've heard it put, because that came out the same time.
Before The Matrix, there was Dark City.
So check this out. I mean, look at this. The Pantheon of the Kings. It's an interest. It's like the Ark of the Covenant type of thing here. I don't even know if that can open up. But just very, very weird.
Well, yeah, that picture. I mean, that kind of begs the question of what was the function of that sarcophagus, if that's what it was, in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid. Yeah, and there's those stone. What is it called? The the Sarcophagus or something. I'm messing that up. It's outside of Giza, where there's
I know what you're talking. You're talking about
there's like they're 100-ton stone
the boxes.
Yeah, and how did they even get them? How did they carve them? How did they're to such precision? And then they're buried. They're down tunnels and underground in ways that it would have been impossible without levitating them to actually carry them into place. And there's like 30 of them or something like that. Yeah, no, it's phenomenal there you go.
Serapeum of Saqqara.
That's it.
Trying to think of the name of
it. So they understood something about materiality that we don't now. They certainly didn't carve these with copper chisels and dolomite hammers. They're highly advanced precision structures, which have nothing to do with those hieroglyphs.
Yeah, these are done after the fact.
Yeah.
And I've gone down this rabbit hole quite a few times, and how they were able to get those things down there. I mean, that's it's really fascinating. And not only that, but the government here is super shady. They don't ever reveal anything. They don't let people explore.
Yeah, it's all very tightly controlled by Zahi Hawass and his ilk. Yeah, that's interesting. That one right there. Go back. Doesn't it look like it's got those nubs on it on the top?
Yeah.
In those megalithic stones, they have those strange nubs. You see them on some of the pyramids in Egypt. You see them in Peru, like in Cuzco. You see them. God, they're all over the world on megalithic structures. And speaking of electric universe theory, this guy Andrew Hall, who is part of the Thunderbolts project, he's done a lot of like really well-researched scientific investigation into various plasma effects like terraforming nature and sort of biblical terraformation of the landscape with plasma strikes and that sort of a thing, like the stuff that Velikovsky gets into. But he did a video recently looking at those nubs and hypothesized that they're actually for dissipating charge, which is interesting. Take.
Yeah, I'd never heard about that before. But yeah, I wouldn't. The Egyptians were on some next level stuff, in my opinion. I think that they were, if it was the dynastic Egyptians or not, or the ones before them, somebody was onto some knowledge that they, again, trying to alchemize and transmute
Right. And just to
reality.
kind of be on the record, like you mentioned Tartaria before, and I don't latch on to that. I don't subscribe to Tartaria because the stuff that I'm looking at is in America, so I call it American. I mean, feel that that's fair play. And that whole thing is just so loaded, and it also strangely tends to be divisive within the community. It's like, yes, it is. No, it's not. Like, I've seen the
I
map
agree.
when it's like over there.
I agree, bro.
Yes, it probably was an empire. That's, worthy of investigation, but that doesn't mean that all old world architecture that has really cool and profound implications as to, and pointing to like a more enlightened human age, like that doesn't mean it's all has to be under that banner. I don't understand that.
No, I agree with you 100%. And people get too lost in the sauce is the problem, and they focus on things that it's like, okay, that's fine, scratch that next one off. Don't focus so much on that aspect. It was like, what was its purpose? This is amazing, right? Like, but regardless of who built it, this is an amazing feat.
Yeah.
I don't think it was the aliens, how they say
Yeah, right. The alien gap.
Ancient astronaut theorists believe, insert whatever crazy idea,
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I've found this true for a long time. Like the closer you get to what, quote unquote truth may be, the more opportunities there are to sort of find an off ramp. Whether it's ancient aliens or whether it's, Tartaria. I don't know. I mean, I feel like, what keeps me sort of on the rails is just looking at the stones. And again, as a builder, just listening to the story that the stones and the brick and the buildings have to tell them, without having to even read a textbook. Like you can read a building and it will have a story to tell, about who built it, about how it works, about its soul. It functions like an organism, so that's my approach.
Yeah,
it keeps me honest.
And the cathedrals, I mean, they literally have pictures on them that you could decipher for days, and the iconography in there, and it just makes you think the Greeks looked at building as algorithms incarnated, right? As these algorithmic beings, and I believe that's why the Pythagoreans worship number, because I think it all goes back to number, and how reality is composed of number, like the Matrix. I mean, there's a reason why it's the numbers coming all the way down and it's a green. Well, synesthesia, maybe they were making people experience something within those buildings, right? I 100% believe in that. And I forgot what it was. I think it was the Hunchback of Notre Dame or something like that, or somebody talking about, I forgot who was talking about. They're like, if you don't get the hidden message or something, watch the movie again or read the book again. And it's like, if you don't get it that time, keep reading until it clicks. And I'm like, what? Because in that movie, they're kind of like hint at like some alchemical type of stuff. So I'm gonna have to check that out. But I love thinking about this sort of stuff.
I think that Victor Hugo wrote about the function of cathedrals. I'm gonna have to go back now that you mentioned the Hunchback of Notre Dame. I think in the original text he talked about cathedrals having some kind of higher purpose.
So this is the guy that wrote Hunchback of Notre Dame. Let's see, Victor Hugo, cathedrals. So there's something about that Notre Dame Cathedral, which is one of the impressive ones too. I mean, it's really beautiful.
Well, I mean, the idea that again, these fires having goofy backstories, the idea that fire was just hapless, construction workers that, I mean, it would have been like trying to burn down an oak, like an old growth oak forest, with like flicking a cigarette. Like it just, when I see things like that, and I remember I was in Buenos Aires with my wife, who's from Argentina, and we were at a restaurant and that came on the news, and that really hit me hard. And I just remember She got to visit it. I never visited it, but I just remember welling up with tears. Like it was profoundly moving and disturbing and unsettling. But it certainly seemed like, okay, the game's afoot. They're attacking the heart of, basically what we're talking about. The alchemical nature of either the church or the buildings themselves. And now the remodel, which I think is nearing completion, it's basically like a secular, showcase of, putting Christianity on display in a very kind of secular way, which is weird. And I remember reading that they removed the altar, and I was like, well, there goes. That's
What the heck?
magic is gone out of that building.
Or is it?
Does it have occulted scaffolding that will continue to resonate?
I believe so. Yeah, dude. And definitely. Is there a labyrinth at the bottom of that one?
Look it up. Good question.
Yeah, that's also another aspect of it. The labyrinth is important because there's a lot of labyrinths. Let's see here. It's lab. I believe does Notre Dame, the looping spiral walking. Yeah, Rosetta is at the center. Is based on the 12th century stone labyrinth installed in the floor of the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Chartres, France. So yeah, it has the entire thing is a labyrinth, bro. The floor itself.
There you go.
Yeah, wow, that's wild. Awesome. Well, yeah, dude. I mean, I said I this is something that's ongoing. I haven't looked at architecture in a little bit because I've been focusing on other stuff, but it's something that's always in the back of my mind with Fulcanelli, which I believe was also a group of people, right? How you were mentioning earlier, some people are fabricated, and I think that singular people, one person, sometimes is actually a group of people, right, in history. And I think Fulcanelli was one of them that was, I don't know if he was trolling or if he was actually trying to reveal some truth and maybe boast about it or something. I don't know what his intentions were, but he was onto something. Because he does, if you read between the lines, he does drop some nuggets, and it's like, but I still can't tell whose side he was on. And it's funny because, right, speaking of secret societies, and the first person to ever mention the name Fulcanelli in a private note was the wife and model. She was the model for the Statue of Liberty, and she was the wife of the man who designed the Statue of Liberty.
Really?
And yeah, and the Lesseps, I think is the guy. They were involved with them, and there were the Lesseps was one of the first people one of the people that introduced the Statue of Liberty to the United States. So again, I don't know. Like I said, occulted scaffolding, some secret society connections, but yes, the Statue of Liberty is connected with one of the quote unquote last greatest alchemists, which was Fulcanelli, which as late as 1924.
So that's really like more like the Statue of Columbia, which is reminiscent of the Statue of Columbia that was at the centerpiece of the Chicago World's Fair, which was said to have been either gold, gilded in gold or actual solid gold. And then there's questions about whether it was actually, because that fire was lost in like 2 or 3 different, World Fair, those buildings were lost in 2 or 3 separate fires in the year and 2 after it closed, and that statue was the last thing to burn. And it's almost it seems like it was done ritualistically. So there's question: was it actually burned, or was it actually secreted away to somebody's palace somewhere? But that, the Statue of Columbia, I think, has more to do with. And the question is too, like, do you really believe the Statue of Liberty was built when they say it was? The base is certainly megalithic, or appears to be Star 40. So that seems to be extremely old. Yeah. And then the statue, they could have built it at the time they said they did and gifted from France to celebrate democracy, but just don't know anymore.
Yeah, neither do I, bro. just another thing to think about. It's just fun little fact there.
Yeah.
So yeah, dude, I think thank you for inviting me, and
Well,
we
thank
should do
you.
this again soon. I know this is for your show. We can do one for my show here soon, and chop it up.
I would love to do that, Juan. Yeah, it's been really great to talk to you, man. This is, you know, and I would love to reach out to Topher too, man. If you could put in a word there and hook me up with him would be amazing, because I just have so many questions in my mind to ask him about and talk about round buildings and, you know, the permaculture and all these things that he's into.
I'll shoot you his email.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. And really nice to speak to you, man. Yeah, I definitely feel a resonance and a kindred spirit there.
Likewise, brother. I appreciate you. Thank you.
How old is your son? You mentioned you have a son?
Yeah, I have 2. One of them is 1 and the other one is 5.
Right on. All right.
Yeah.
Right in there. Cool. My oldest just moved out. He's heading to college, and he's actually heading to a firefighter academy in Tacoma. So
only 1?
And then I have two more sons. 3 teenage boys. Yep.
Yeah, I got 2 boys too, so it's awesome, man. Well,
yeah, good times.
Appreciate you, bro. We'll chop it up here again soon on my channel.
All right, brother. Look forward to next time.